There is a moment I keep coming back to, and honestly, every time I think about it, something shifts in my chest. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, standing at a grocery store checkout, alone. No adult hovering 2 steps behind her, no parent whispering the right answer into her ear. She had a small canvas bag in one hand and a fistful of coins in the other, and she was counting them out onto the counter with this quiet, focused look on her face. Like this was just Tuesday. Because for her, it was. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, waited without a word. No impatience, no concern, no reaching over to help. Just a normal exchange between two people. The girl placed the last coin down, picked up her bag, and walked out through the glass doors into the gray morning, like she had done it 1,000 times. And the wild thing is, she probably had. I was standing in line behind her, and I remember looking around the store, waiting for someone to react the way I was reacting. Nobody did. An older man behind me was checking his phone. A young guy in a jacket was loading his items onto the belt. The cashier had already moved on. I was the only one in that store who found this remarkable. And that bothered me more than anything else I saw that morning. Not the girl. Me. Because the question that hit me standing there, holding my coffee and my bread, was not, where are her parents? The question was, when exactly did I decide that a child doing something independently was something to be alarmed about? When did that happen? I drove home that morning thinking about it. I could not shake it. I have a son, Oliver. He was 9 at the time. And I tried to picture him standing at that checkout counter, alone, counting coins, walking out with the bag. And I realized, with this slow and honestly uncomfortable feeling, that I had never once given him the chance to try. Not because I thought he could not do it. I had just never thought to let him. That girl in the grocery store did not look scared. She did not look lost or overwhelmed or like she needed saving. She looked completely at home in her own life. And something about that, the ease of it, the total ordinary calm of it, stayed with me for days. If this kind of thing makes you think too, share this video and subscribe. It means a lot and helps this reach more people who need to hear it. Now, here is the part that I think is worth sitting with for a second, because I have talked to a lot of people about that morning, and the reactions are almost always split right down the middle. Half the people I tell this to smile and say something like, "Good for her, kids today are too sheltered." The other half get this tight look on their face and say, "But where were her parents?" And what I find fascinating is that both groups are absolutely certain they are the reasonable ones. Neither of them questions the reaction itself. Neither of them asks, "Why do I feel what I feel right now?" But that automatic response, that immediate gut pull, whether it is admiration or anxiety, tells you something real about what you were quietly taught to believe before you ever had an opinion about it. I grew up in a house where my mother knew every family on our street by name. She knew which kids belonged to which door. She knew who walked to school together and who had a dog that would bark if something was wrong. That was her safety system, and it was invisible, and it was everywhere. By the time I was 8, I was walking to the corner shop alone, and nobody called it brave, because it was not brave. It was just normal. Somewhere between then and now, that normal disappeared, and what replaced it was not safer. It was just louder. It was GPS on a phone. It was check-in texts every 40 minutes. It was the unspoken agreement that a child existing in public without an adult nearby is a problem waiting to happen. And we absorbed that agreement so gradually, so quietly, that most of us cannot even remember deciding to believe it. We just woke up one day and it was already in us, already shaping every call we made as parents. That is what that grocery store moment cracked open for me. Not a question about one little girl with a bag of coins. A question about me, and about every assumption I had been carrying around without ever once putting it down and looking at it clearly. Because here is the thing. That gut reaction you had, reading about her, whatever it was, that is not just a feeling. That is a map. And if you follow it carefully enough, it leads somewhere worth going. So I did something after that morning that I am a little embarrassed to admit. I went home, sat down at the kitchen table, and actually tried to build a logical argument for why that girl was fine. Why what I saw was not a problem. Why my anxiety was the irrational thing in the room. And the first thing my brain handed me was this. It is probably just safer where she lives. Crime rate, different neighborhood, different city, different world. And for about 40 minutes, that explanation felt airtight. It felt like I had solved it. I made myself a second coffee, leaned back, and thought, well, there you go. Mystery closed. But then I started pulling on that thread, slowly, and the whole thing came apart in my hands. Because I know places, real places, places I have been to, quiet towns where people do not lock their doors at night, where kids rode bikes until dark when I was growing up there, and where parents today still drive their children to school every single morning. Same low crime, completely different behavior. So if safety was the whole explanation, those kids would be walking too. But they are not. And that gap, that space between safe environment and independent child, that is where the real question lives. The crime rate answer is comfortable because it makes the whole thing someone else's problem. It says, I would do the same if only my world were different. It is a way of admiring something without having to examine yourself. And I had been doing exactly that, standing in that store, watching that girl, and already reaching for the explanation that would let me off the hook fastest. That is not a small thing to notice about yourself. I kept thinking about it for days after, turning it over. And eventually, I called my old friend Rachel, who has 3 kids and had spent a couple of years living abroad with her family before coming back. I figured if anyone had seen this contrast up close, it was her. She picked up on the second ring, and I told her the whole story. The girl, the coins, the cashier, all of it. There was a pause on the line, and then she said something that I honestly was not expecting. She said, "You know what the difference actually is? It is not about where you live. It is about what you think your job is as a parent." I asked her what she meant. She said, when we were living abroad, I noticed that the parents around us, they were not relaxed because they felt safer. They were relaxed because they had a completely different idea of what they were supposed to be doing. And that one sentence sat in me like a stone dropped into still water, rings moving outward slowly. Because she was right, and I had been circling that truth without landing on it. The crime rate answer falls apart not just logically, but emotionally, because fear does not actually track with danger that precisely. Parents in genuinely safe places are still anxious. Parents in statistically riskier places sometimes raise kids with remarkable freedom. The variable is not the street outside. The variable is the belief inside. And that belief, whatever it is, gets passed down without a single conversation ever happening about it. It just travels, parent to child, generation to generation, invisible as air and just as constant. And here is what made me genuinely uncomfortable as I kept thinking about all of this. I realized I had never once examined mine. Rachel's words hit me so hard that I actually wrote them down on a piece of paper and stuck it to my fridge. Not because I am the kind of person who puts inspirational quotes on their fridge. I am absolutely not. But because I needed to keep looking at it until I understood what it actually meant in practice. What you think your job is as a parent. That sentence. Because here is the thing that Rachel said next, and this is the part that really got under my skin. She said, when Oliver was small, what was the first thing you thought about every morning as a parent? And I did not even have to think about the answer. It was always some version of, how do I get through today without anything going wrong? How do I keep the day smooth? How do I make sure he is okay? And she said, Yeah, that is what most of us think. And that thinking, that exact framing, quietly shapes every single decision you make without you realizing it. Because if your job is to make sure nothing goes wrong, then every time your child reaches for something difficult, your instinct is to get there first. Not out of cruelty, out of love, but the effect is the same. The child never gets to find out what happens when they reach. I sat with that for a long time. And then I thought about Oliver at 9, sitting at the kitchen table trying to put together a model he had gotten as a gift. The pieces were fiddly and small, and after about 10 minutes, I could see his jaw tightening, the frustration building. And I remember very clearly reaching over and saying, "Here, let me show you." He handed it to me. I fixed the piece. And I told myself I was helping. But what I had actually done, without meaning to, was teach him that when things get hard, the solution is somewhere outside himself. I had done that 100 times before that afternoon, probably more, and I had called it parenting. The question Rachel planted in me was not dramatic. It was not a thunderclap moment. It was quieter than that. It was, what if the goal was not to make the day smooth, but to make him capable? What does that look like in practice, in the small, ordinary moments, before any of the big ones arrive? And that question, once it was in my head, changed the lens I was looking through completely. So I started paying attention differently, and what I noticed, once I started actually looking, was almost embarrassing in how obvious it was. Every task I did for Oliver that he could have done himself was not a kindness. It was a quiet message, and the message was, "I do not think you can handle this." I am not saying I walked around thinking that consciously. I did not. But the accumulation of those moments, packed lunch, tied laces, sorted bag, smoothed conflict, all of it stacked up into something Oliver could feel, even if he could not name it. Kids feel that kind of thing in their bodies before they can say it in words. And the result, when I started paying attention, was that Oliver would hand problems to me before he had even tried them. Not because he was lazy, because that was the system we had built together, him and me, over years, without either of us ever discussing it. I started small. The first thing I changed was the morning routine. Oliver was 9, and I had been making his breakfast every single day without ever questioning it. One morning, I just did not. I told him, "You know where everything is," and I went and sat with my coffee by the window. He stood in the kitchen for a moment, genuinely uncertain, looking at me, waiting for me to get up. I did not move. And after about 30 seconds, he opened the cabinet and started figuring it out. The toast was a bit dark. The orange juice was filled too high and dripped on the counter. But he ate it, all of it. And the look on his face when he sat down, that small, quiet pride, that was not about breakfast. That was about something else entirely. Something that, if I had made the toast myself, he would have missed completely. And here is what I did not expect. Once I started letting Oliver do things, actually do them, without jumping in, I started seeing a version of him I had not seen before. A version that was more solid somehow, more present. And that made me think about the girl in the grocery store again, and about what her ordinary Tuesday morning was actually building in her. One coin at a time, one small act at a time, in a way that had nothing to do with groceries at all. There is something nobody tells you when you start giving your child more freedom. The hardest part is not letting go. The hardest part is watching what happens when the world does not catch them. And I found that out in a way I was not ready for at all. A few weeks after the breakfast experiment, Oliver asked if he could walk to his friend Danny's house alone. Danny lived about 8 minutes over, 3 streets over, a route Oliver knew because we had walked it together probably 50 times. My first instinct was the usual one. I will drive you, it is fine. But I caught myself this time. I thought about Rachel, about the question she had planted in me, about the girl with the coins. And I said yes. I told him the route out loud, even though he knew it, more for me than for him. He grabbed his jacket and was out the door before I could add anything else. And then I stood in the hallway listening to the sound of my own house, which suddenly felt very quiet, and I realized I had absolutely no idea what to do with myself. I checked my phone, put it down, looked out the window, checked my phone again. The 8 minutes it took him to get there felt like something much longer. When he texted me from Danny's phone to say he had arrived, I let out a breath I did not know I had been holding. And I stood there in my kitchen feeling two things at exactly the same time: relief and something that took me a moment to name. It was embarrassment. Because he was fine. He had always been going to be fine. And the one who had needed managing that afternoon was not Oliver. It was me. That is the thing nobody talks about when they talk about raising independent kids. The obstacle is not the child. It almost never is. The obstacle is the parent. And specifically, it is the parent's relationship with the feeling of not knowing. Not knowing exactly where they are. Not knowing if they are okay. Not knowing what is happening in the 8 minutes between the front door and Danny's house. We have built an entire architecture of modern parenting around the elimination of that feeling. And in doing so, we have accidentally eliminated something our children desperately need. What Oliver's walk to Danny's house showed me was not just that he could do it. It showed me something about the neighborhood I had been living in for years without actually seeing. Because while I was standing at my window trying not to pace, I watched something happen outside that genuinely surprised me. Oliver had made it maybe half a block when he stopped at the corner, and the man from 3 doors down, a retired guy named Frank, who was always doing something in his front garden, looked up and called out to him. I could not hear what was said, but I saw Oliver stop and talk to Frank for maybe 30 seconds. Frank pointed down the street in the direction Oliver was already heading, nodded, and went back to his garden. Oliver kept walking. It was nothing. It was the smallest possible exchange, but it stayed with me because I suddenly understood something I had been missing. Frank knew Oliver. Not well, not like family, but enough. Enough to notice him. Enough to check in without making it weird. And in that 30 seconds, without any planning or organizing or parental coordination, something real had happened. Oliver had moved through the street, and the street had quietly looked after him in the way that streets used to do before we all went inside and closed the curtains. I had not built that. I had not arranged it. It existed because Oliver had been outside enough times for Frank to know his face. That was all it took. And I started thinking about how many Franks there might be on our street. On the streets around us, people who knew Oliver by sight. People who would notice if something seemed wrong. People who formed a kind of loose, invisible, completely unorganized safety net that I had never once thought to count as a resource. Because I had been so focused on the risks outside my front door that I had never stopped to look at what was also out there. And that shifted something in me that has not shifted back. The moment I realized I had been failing my son for years hit me, not dramatically, not in a single conversation, but on a completely ordinary Wednesday evening when Oliver could not figure out how to handle a disagreement with a kid at school. He came home, dropped his bag by the door, and sat at the kitchen table with this flat, defeated expression, waiting, just waiting. And I realized he was waiting for me to solve it. The way he always had, the way I had always let him. He was 10 years old, and he genuinely did not know what to do with a difficult feeling. Because every time a difficult feeling had appeared, I had walked over and quietly removed it. I had been so focused on giving Oliver the practical things, letting him make his breakfast, walk to Danny's, carry his own bag, that I had missed the deeper layer entirely. Independence is not just about physical tasks. It is about the inner experience of sitting with something uncomfortable and not immediately reaching for someone else to make it stop. And I had been robbing him of that experience for a decade, without ever once meaning to. So that evening, I did something that felt genuinely strange. He told me what happened with the kid at school, and I listened, all the way through, without offering a single solution. When he finished, I just said, "That sounds really frustrating. What do you think you want to do about it?" He looked at me like I had spoken in a different language. He was not used to the question being bounced back. There was a long silence, the kind that has texture to it, the kind you feel in your chest. And then, slowly, haltingly, he started thinking out loud. He was not good at it yet. The ideas were rough, and some of them were not great. But they were his. And by the end of that conversation, something had shifted in him that I could actually see. His shoulders were different, less collapsed, like something small but real had clicked into place. And I thought, how many times had I stolen that click from him by just giving him the answer before he had a chance to find it himself? That conversation at the kitchen table became a turning point, but not in the way turning points usually work in stories. It was not the end of anything. It was more like the moment you realize you have been holding a door shut without knowing it, and you finally take your hand off. Things do not change overnight. Oliver did not suddenly become a different kid. But over the following months, something accumulated. Small things, quiet things, the kind you only notice if you are paying attention. He started figuring things out before coming to me. Not always, not perfectly, but enough. Enough that I could feel the difference in the house. There was less of a particular kind of tension I had not even known was there until it started to ease. And I kept thinking about the girl in the grocery store, the one who had started all of this for me. That Tuesday morning that had felt so ordinary and turned out to be anything but. I thought about what her life probably looked like behind the scenes. Not one dramatic moment of being trusted, but thousands of quiet ones. The small tasks, the small failures, the small recoveries, all of it stacking up invisibly into something solid. Something she would carry with her long after the grocery store, long after childhood, into every room and every challenge her life would eventually hand her. Because that is the thing about this kind of parenting. You cannot see the thing you are building while you are building it. It does not look like anything from the outside. It looks like a kid making slightly burnt toast, or counting coins at a checkout, or walking 8 minutes down a familiar street. It looks like nothing. But what is actually happening, in those small, unremarkable moments, is that a person is being assembled. A person who knows from direct personal experience, not from being told, but from actually living it, that they can handle what comes. That the world does not break them when things go wrong. That they have resources inside themselves they can reach for before they reach for anyone else. And the parent who gives them that is not the parent who hovered the least or worried the least. It is the parent who was brave enough to stay quiet in the moments when every instinct said to step in. That is the real work. Quiet, invisible, and the most important thing you will ever do. So here is what I want to leave you with. The girl at the checkout was not remarkable because she was brave. She was remarkable because bravery had become completely ordinary for her. That is what you are actually building, one small moment at a time. Now, I want to ask you something honestly, and I want you to think about it before you answer. What is the last thing you did for your child that they could have done for themselves? Write it in the comments. Because I think that answer, whatever it is the exact place to start. If this story made you think differently, please share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe if you want more. It means more than you know.